right, and now to discuss international cannabis markets and business opportunities, leading this panel, co-founders of SNF Abogados. Please welcome Guillermo Fernandez Navarro. Thank you.
Hello, hello. Okay, hello. Hello. Good morning to everyone. My name is Guillermo Fernandez. I'm a co-founder and attorney at SAF Abogados. SAF Abogados is a law firm specialist in cannabis. We are based in Madrid. We've been working on cannabis over than 10 years. We are involved in any single cannabis area, such as medical cannabis cultivation licensing, hemp, CBD products, cannabis clubs, criminal defense. I want to say that it's amazing to see this theater full of people again after 2 years talking about cannabis. I want to say thank to ICBC for making this event possible event. I hope everyone enjoy. So let's start with this amazing panel we have today. We want to talk about legal framework and business opportunities. Let me introduce our panelists. We have Chloe Grossman. Chloe is the Executive Director of Corporate Growth at Trulieve. Trulieve is the biggest cannabis company in the US right now. Also, we have Kai-Friedrich. He's a founder and lawyer at KFN Plus in Berlin. And we have Juana Vasella. She's a lawyer at MME Zurich. So let's have them introduce themselves. Chloe, please.
Sure. Hello, everyone. I'm Chloe Grossman, Executive Director of Corporate Growth at Trulieve Cannabis Corp. So we're a multi-state operator in the United States. So my job entails overseeing post-merger and acquisition integration, as well as expansion into new markets. And one of the reasons I'm on this panel is I have a long history of working in the competitive licensing field in the United States. So happy to be here with all of you.
My name is Kai-Friedrich Niermann. I'm a lawyer from Germany. I'm a lawyer since 2003 and started to work in the cannabis space in 2017 as Germany legalized medical cannabis. I'm consulting CBD companies, hemp companies, medical cannabis import companies. I'm also advisor to IHA, to the European Industrial Hemp Association, which has setting up a novel food joint application. And yeah, we are looking for legalization in Germany, and that's one of my main focus, regulatory approvals. So happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you as well, Guillermo, for a kind explanation and introduction. My name is Juana Vasella. I'm here from Switzerland. I'm a lawyer specialized in medical law. That's why I'm here, because I want to speak about medicinal cannabis opportunities, and as well I'm a professor for business law, specialized in health law in Germany. So I have like two point of views. And a disclaimer, as a lawyer, I maybe will have let's say a weird kind of view on the market.
Okay, great. Thank you guys. So let's start with the panel. Let's talk first of all about licensing process and legal framework. Can you please, Chloe, let us know how is the situation in US or in United States?
Absolutely, and the situation in the United States is pretty unique. So the first thing to note is that at the federal level, cannabis is actually not legal. It's considered a Schedule I controlled substance, meaning it doesn't have any recognized medicinal use, and also is considered to have high potential for abuse. But the way that American law is set up, the division of state and federal authority gives states a lot of power over writing their own laws within their own boundaries. So that has allowed states to experiment with cannabis policy within their borders. So they effectively decide whether to regulate cannabis as well as how to regulate cannabis. And this has led to a patchwork of state regulations. So every state is very different, which I think is important to understand. So the licensing structures and the markets, the way that the markets are structured, are very intertwined in the U.S. and I think probably everywhere. And the dynamics between those two shape the business opportunities as well as the strategies that businesses use to succeed in those markets. So we'll talk a little bit about that later. So in terms of the ways that states differ in structure and licensing process, there are some more restrictive states which tend to have limited license systems, and those systems typically have higher barriers to entry and are attractive for reasons that I think we can all understand. Many unlimited license states see explosive growth, and one of the things that's really interesting about those states is you really see the innovation and the excitement of a true capitalist environment that's hyper-competitive. There's also licensing both at the state and local level, sometimes both at the same time in one market. So some states, typically more conservative ones, choose not to give the localities any control, whereas others, like California, actually give a lot of control to the localities, and that creates a whole different situation. So when the localities do have control, you tend to have longer licensing processes, you tend to have higher costs and just frankly more headaches. So that is something to watch out for if you're looking at cannabis markets in the United States. There are also 4 different licensing processes that I would categorize them into. So the first is limited or competitive licensing. So this is typical of limited license markets. So again, high barriers to entry, and it's kind of like a professional battle royale for these coveted licenses. The second type is a lottery licensing model. So in that case, all companies that meet a set of minimum standards have their name thrown into a hat, so to speak, and are randomly selected to get licenses. So the purpose of that model is basically to try to even the playing field and also cut down on bias in the license award process. Another different model is just a straight minimum standards model, and this is very typical of unlimited license markets. So anybody who meets the minimum standards is able to get a license. And then finally, this is a little bit different, but there's grandfathering of existing operators. So let's say a market is going from medical to adult use. So at that catalyst point, the medical operators are typically grandfathered in or have some process for converting into the new market. So they kind of get first right of entry. So yeah, I think those are the key points, and I will pass it back to you.
Okay, thank you, Chloe. Just to add one line more, when do you think we will see a federal regulation?
That is the billion-dollar question. Really, it's hard to say. We are seeing support on both sides of the aisle at the federal level now. I don't think it will be, within the next year, but we've been saying, within the next 2 years for quite a while now. So it's anyone's guess, but we are definitely pushing behind the scenes for that.
Thank you so much. So, Kai, how is the situation in Niermann? A lot of people is excited about the latest news, so please let us know.
Sure. Yeah, so Germany had a federal election last year in September, and the parties, especially the Green Party and the Liberals, they declared, or they said they want legalization of cannabis. And the Social Democratic Party, they were in favor of model projects beforehand, but it turned out in the coalition negotiations that they really agreed on a free market model, on a legalization with dispensaries, and that's short passage in the coalition agreement, but they say it's coming. So we have now problems because the draft of the law will be the Ministry of Health is responsible, is in charge for this draft, and the Ministry of Health is also responsible for Corona, and he is also responsible for the health crisis coming by the Ukraine crisis. So we have lots of refugees. We're expecting 10 million refugees in Europe, and many people will come to Germany as well again, and they have to integrate these people into the health system. So the Ministry of Health is very, very busy, and he is in charge of the draft because it's a health issue. We see that. It's a harm reduction health issue, so the Ministry of Health is supposed to deal with it. And he said already, Karl Lauterbach, there won't be a draft this year. So he will start working with his ministry, with his house. He will start working on the draft early next year. So the debate is sort of in the off this year on the legalization side, and there are still some really problems, some crucial problems we have to solve, especially the licensing question. So there is a draft in place by the Green Party, the so-called Cannabis Control Act. They brought that to Bundestag in 2017 the first time, and last year the second time. And this draft foresees caps and minimum distances between schools and youth facilities. The minimum distances are no problem, but the caps, the restrictions on maximum numbers for dispensaries in a community, that is a real problem, because when you issue a license and the authority uses or exercises its discretion how to pick, whom to pick, and if you have let's say 20 licenses you can give away in one community, but you have 200 interested parties, okay, so the authority has to make a decision whom to pick. And if they didn't use their discretion properly and your competitor says, oh no, the authority made a mistake, so they start a lawsuit, a competitor lawsuit, and then you may get your license and start working and start selling and start investing, and after 2 years the court says, no, I will withdraw your license because your competitor won. So that's going to be a big problem, and we will do all we can this year to convince the lawmakers that there are no need for caps, for maximum number restrictions. Because there is no need. They all say we need restrictions on the numbers. The scientists, drug scientists, and social workers are saying that, but it doesn't make sense. So then you have an unrestricted number of licenses. The advantage is you can start from day one with enough dispensaries. You can fight the illicit market really effectively, but there will of course be a market shakeout after 2 or 3 years because of the oversupply, but that's what I think is the better option for Germany to choose. And we will see how that will unfold this year, the debate. Everyone's saying it's coming from the government, but please be patient. We also demanded decriminalization in the first step, but the coalition said, no, we want one law, we want one draft, we want one solution, and not decriminalization beforehand and then legalization, because that endangers endangers the whole project. That's what they say. But still, courts are still judging. They still law enforcement is still working on cannabis cases. Are still chasing after consumers right now, after CBD businesses. So we still have to do some advocating this year and some lobbying this year. But I'm convinced it's coming. They're all saying, all members who have the power in the coalition say that it's coming. So let's see.
I know it's not going to be easy, it's not going to be fast, but I really hope that Germany regulates cannabis, because that would be an amazing example for the rest of countries in Europe. So let us know, Juana, how is everything going in Switzerland?
Very well. You know, Switzerland is called a European hub of cannabis, as you know. And so the Swiss regulation of cannabis differentiates between the three different uses: the industrial, the medical, and the recreational use. And therefore, three different regulations I'm going to speak about, and at least I will speak about the latest developments. And you have to know it's all about the THC concentration, and irrespective of the CBD content. Unlike THC, CBD in Switzerland is not considered as a narcotic. So firstly, let's have a look on the industrial use. The Swiss laws regarding the industrial use is very liberal, as you know already. So the industrial cannabis that is less than 1%, I will speak always about this limit, 1%, is not legally a narcotic, but is subject to the regulation how it comes to the market. So if it's food, cosmetics, tobacco, what else, chemicals, and so on. So the use is permitted, are determined by these regulations: food, cosmetics, liquids for tobaccos, and so on. If you want some, I can give later on in the questions, in the discussion, detailed information. So the status for the industrial use, it is legal in Switzerland as long as it contains less than 1% of THC. Let's have a look on the medical use. The Swiss law regarding the medicinal cannabis is, let's say, surprisingly limited in comparison to the industrial use. So growing, selling, importing cannabis for medical uses or medical purpose is allowed. However, there's a distinction between cannabis containing at least 1% THC and other cannabis. So we have to differentiate between the cannabis at least 1% THC and less than 1% THC. First of all, cannabis containing at least 1% THC is qualified as a narcotic, but it can be qualified as a medical product. That could be very interesting for some of you. In this case, the specific medicinal product relation applies. That means the cannabis can only be grown, imported, and sold for medical use if permitted by the Federal Office for the Public Health. It's permitted, but you need a permission. And the cannabis containing less than 1% intended to be used for medical purposes is subject to the general, just the normal, let's say normal regulation of medicinal products. And by that you can manufacture, wholesale, and market the cannabis. Now, or in these days, the patients have access to authorized cannabis-based drugs only on medical prescription, but they have access. For cannabis containing at least 1% THC, patients can apply via their physicians that permission, and so we can have we can say it's legal. Cannabis in Switzerland is legal, even though it contains more, or at least 1% THC, but you need an official permit and a medical prescription, but it's allowed. And thirdly, the recreational use. Maybe some of you will be interested in that. So the adult recreational cannabis use has been decriminalized in Switzerland. So cannabis containing at least 1%, that's in comparison to other European countries a lot, is qualified as a narcotic, but production, importation, selling of cannabis use is not allowed. But what's interesting, the personal possession of cannabis with at least 1% of fewer than 10 grams is not even subject to a fine. It's not allowed, but you can have at least, or not, you can have up to 10 grams and you will not be fined. It's a very Swiss approach. So the status regarding the recreational use is it's illegal if it contains at least 1%. Less it's allowed, but at least 10% it's illegal. But even though you will approach with very low fines. What would be very interesting is to speak about the latest developments. There are two movements regarding, firstly, the recreational use and secondly, the medical use. Regarding recreational use, in May 2021, the Swiss government started a limited 10 years pilot program, a pilot project to study the economic and the health impacts of non-cannabis uses. You remember, the medical use is allowed, but now we have the pilot project to have a look on what happens with the non-medical cannabis. So again, the Swiss Federal Office of Public Health issues production permits to cannabis growers to supply the program, and a variety of THC and CBD. THC and CBD products will be available to the pilot participants. Maybe somebody of you want to be a volunteer with this program, because the recreational cannabis pilot schemes are requested by public or private organizations, and they have to work together with research institutes. And I had a look on the conditions when you get, or how it's possible to get such a permit. What do you have to fulfill? The programs, they must have a specific research goal. For example, such as acquiring data. So acquiring data, it's a very wide idea, so somebody of you would be interested in. For example, data on the socio-economic effects on the cannabis legalization, and the pilot programs have to be limited, that's a problem maybe, to a specific municipality and may run for 5 years, but there's the opportunity to extend. And what I thought it's very interesting, the participants are limited to 10 milligram THC per month, and the products cannot, in the law they say they cannot contain more than 20%. 20%, I think it's a lot, and there some opportunities for the market. So producers are held to strict quality standards. They have to follow field trials that conducted in 2020, and they are allowed, as I said before, volunteers, participants, up to 5,000. 5,000, so maybe some of you would be join or wanted to join. Well, and there's another late development regarding the medical use, as I said before. Switzerland, or the Swiss government, plans to facilitate the access to cannabis use treatments, cannabis used or based medicinal products for patients. And in June 2020, 2 years ago, the Federal Council issued the draft legislation, and it has to come in force this summer. So it's very close that we will be offered with new opportunities. And under the amended law, patients will be able to obtain cannabis-based treatments directly from doctors. There will no longer be necessary to require an exceptional permit by the authority. I can explain about the medical use program later. Just in the end, about the licensee, as I said before, there's a national program that opens opportunities for growers, producers, and so on. And just the last year, the federal office already issued some licenses, it's the so-called cannabis licenses, but the regulations and requirements of the procedure are extremely high, but we could help to go through. Among other things, a safety concept and a quality management must be demonstrated. But you can fulfill, I think. In addition, experience in cultivation of cannabis and the compliance with the GACP guidelines. GACP, it means good agriculture and collection practice, and the attention to sustainability and ecology will pay off. And at last, it would be easier, but it's not a condition, that it's a cannabis product of Swiss origin that complies with the Swiss rules of organic farming. So, if you want, I can give you some detailed information later. Especially, I have a checklist prepared for producers, growers. They have the interest to go into the Swiss market, especially for the approval for the pilot trials.
Okay, thank you so much, Juana. I hope Switzerland move forward to get the integral regulation sooner than later. Thank you so much. To add two lines about how is the situation in Spain, we still have a lot of work to do. We are working on it, but the use of medical and recreational cannabis in Spain is not regulated yet. The latest news is that an experts commission to talk about medical cannabis just started 2 days ago. It will work until June. Let's see what happens. Let's see positive and wait for the result. About CBD market is not regulated either in Spain. There is a really big CBD market in Spain. You can find different products. You go around the city, you will see so many shops. You can find flowers, you can find CBD oil, you can find cosmetics products, maybe some food supplement either, but as I said, it's not regulated. All these companies are working in a gray area, but the market is getting bigger and bigger, or even more after the European Court resolution, like almost 2 years ago. So I cannot wait for the European Union regulate at least CBD sooner than later. Also, we have in Spain some companies growing medical cannabis, but these companies have to export the product to legal markets with an authorized or a legal distributor. That's how is the situation in Spain. Now we can keep going, and let's talk about the second point of this panel. Let's talk about licensing requirements. So please, Chloe, let us know, what do we need to get a license in the United States?
Absolutely. So just like pretty much everything in the United States related to cannabis, it really differs substantially from state to state. There are some common threads, though, so those are what I'll focus on. So first of all, the most boring one, but the business basics. So you have to have business formation documents, usually insurance, tax accounts, etc. I think that's pretty typical. The second thing is your team and a lot of documents related to your team. So what your team consists of depends on the state, how they define it, but it's typically owners, people who are operating the business or controlling the business, financial interest holders, and in some cases, employees, contractors, etc. So I think one of the things that always shocks people when they start to get into the licensing process in cannabis in the US is that if you are an owner or one of the other people who needs to make disclosures, you are going to have a very deep dive into your background. So I'll give you one example. In a state that I previously worked in, there were requests for the tax returns for the last 5 years, not just of owners, but of their spouses, and for every business that they have any amount of business interest in. So that's like an unbelievable amount of documentation. Also, some states require the team to meet professional standards, so you may have to have a chemist on board or something along those lines. Finally, states also sometimes try to limit ownership only to people who are local to that state, but that often gets struck down in courts of law. So beyond team, property is probably the most critical thing. So locking down a property early, very important. You also have to typically have local zoning or land use authorizations to go along with that property. So property control is a must, whether current or conditioned on licensure, and highly recommend conditioned on licensure because there's often lawsuits. So if you lock down a property, you may be paying a lease for 2 years, 3 years while lawsuits are being resolved. Once you have all of that taken care of, then you typically have to prepare a facility design, a construction schedule, because there's often, especially in new markets, a lot of interest in how quickly you can get to market. Funding is also a critical thing, and the amount of funding that you have to have in order to apply differs greatly from state to state, but we've seen, having to have $2 million in liquid capital in a bank account, so it can be quite substantial. You also have to have plans of operations, or what we refer to as narratives. So you could submit standard operating procedures in some cases, but you typically don't want to in order to protect your processes. So you end up preparing these very detailed descriptions of exactly what you're going to do in your business. So cultivation, manufacturing, dispensing, but also things like security, community impact, and so many other things. So that's where consultants often come into play, because sometimes applications can be 1,000+ pages. There also, local support's really important, so you may have to actually have a letter of support from the local government or some type of local license, depending on what the application requirements are. And finally, things that set you apart. So that may be partnerships, research that you're doing, philanthropy, environmental initiatives, diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. It really just depends on what your company specializes in. So now I'll just go over a few pieces of advice for how to win in these competitive markets. So First, play to your strengths, but also understand what the state is looking for. So I think it's really critical to analyze public meetings, laws and regulations, application materials, and also who are the key players who are involved both in regulating cannabis, writing the laws, et cetera, and understanding by reading between the lines what the priorities are and what they're looking for in a licensee. Then you can find where you can deliver based on your unique value that you bring as a company. Second, if you are in a competitive licensing process, you absolutely must distinguish yourself. You cannot just rely on the bare minimum of what they're asking for. I had clients in the past say, oh, you know what, I'm just going to give them exactly what they're asking for across the board. And I can tell you those clients pretty much always fail. You have to go above and beyond in every regard. If it's a lottery process, you should be strategic and consider the fact that it's a numbers game. So if there are geographic limits and you can only apply once in different geographies, you should probably apply once in each geography. Also, if you can apply both in populated areas and less populated areas, that's also a pretty good strategy because if the pool is smaller, your probability of winning is higher. Finally, expect lawsuits. Don't lock yourself into anything that is going to drain you financially if you have to wait for 2 or 3 years while legal matters are resolved.
Thank you very much. Kai, please, what about Niermann?
Yeah,
Niermann.
maybe I can add. I can agree on most points except of the lottery system. Can't understand that. But I can add to, we only have the draft in Germany, the Cannabis Control Act by the Greens. This is the blueprint because it's a complete law. It's really 60, 70 pages long, export, import, free market model, everything is regulated. It will also be a federal law, so there won't be any interstate restriction, interstate commerce restrictions, and you can have as much licenses as you want to when you get one in the end, okay? But what is also clear is that the staff members, the staff has to be trained. The Ministry of Justice, the Secretary of Justice has confirmed that. It's the basic thought of the Cannabis Control Act is the social responsibility of this act. So you get the free market, you get the legalized market, but on the other hand, to regulate that fight the negative consequences, you have to have strict social responsibilities in place. So the staff has to be trained. The staff has to have a certificate of responsible selling in the end. No one knows yet how intense and how long this education will be. We will have to look at the US or at Canada for other examples, but the law says the staff member has to know about how cannabis works and about prevention options. They have to identify risky consumption patterns with their clients. Then they have to talk about it with their clients, etc. And the shops have to have a social concept in place. So they have to have in written a concept how they will fit in their community, in the neighborhood, and what are they doing about prevention and drug addiction, and they have to be affiliated with drug prevention associations, etc., etc. So the whole set of regulations concerning the social responsibility, but we have to work this out as well. This year, next year, the details, how intense it will be, but this will come.
Kai, Michael? Sorry.
We have to stop?
No, I'm sorry. Thank you for your expertise, Kai. We are soon, we come to the end now, but like always, we have to give the audience the chance to ask a few questions, or at least one question. I think there's not more time than one question, so if there's a question, please. I see there's one question. I'll give you the microphone.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Niermann, You mentioned about the dispensaries and shopping in Germany, but what about the growing licenses in Germany? As I know, there is 13 lots in 2019 after the last tender. Are they planning to give more licensing? In this draft, I don't know. If you
Yeah, cultivation is also possible according to this draft, for sure. But I doubt that cultivating of recreational cannabis in Germany has a future, because we have a demand of 400 to 600 tons for dried flowers alone. So you would have to set up facilities and plants for cultivation, like we see them in Switzerland, with big investments of 20, 25 millions. We would need 20, 30 facilities of these to cover the demand domestically. I don't think this makes sense from a climate perspective as well, because these facilities are really energy consuming, and there are many, many facilities all over the world, in Lesotho, in South Africa, Colombia, North Macedonia. They have their facilities in place, they have better weather conditions, so Germany, I think, will have to rely on imports for a long time, or for most of the material. And we have 3 domestic licenses granted in 2019 for medical cannabis, and the Liberal Party said they want to make Germany a medical cannabis export nation. So we might see that there will be new tenders for medical cannabis cultivation, so that Germany can also supply domestically the medical cannabis market globally.
Yeah, thank you.
Maybe you should come to Switzerland because we have a use rate of 8.7%. We have a very big black and white market, so maybe you could discuss later.
Yeah, thank you very much to the panelists. I think we do have...
Yeah, we're running up against it. Let's hear it again for our panelists. Also, let's hear it for Mika for running around handing people the microphone. If you have more questions, I'm sure they'd love to meet you right outside, and you could practically corner them and ask them all the questions you want. Politely, but you can do it. I'm sure people do. Thank you all so very much. Let's hear it one more time for our panel. We're going to move right along. That was very great, super enlightening.